Egypt strikes back after the beheading of 21 Coptic Christians, and terrorism rears its ugly head in Denmark, posing yet another challenge to the president's embattled foreign policy. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Ed Henry in for Brett Baer. While the Commander-in-Chief spent President's Day weekend playing golf far from home in Southern California, terror forces in Northern Africa and Northern Europe staged new attacks and threatened to bring their violence to the doorsteps of the global Christian community, prompting an urgent plea from a key member of NATO tonight. We have Fox Team coverage, Doug McKelway at the White House with the reaction to a grisly weekend of terror. Amy Kellogg is in London as another European capital, this time Copenhagen, is touched by terror. But we begin tonight with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge and Egypt's response to the brutal murder of 21 Christians. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Ed. While there's no independent confirmation tonight, Libya media is reporting that more Egyptians have been kidnapped in retaliation for today's airstrikes.
Egyptian warplanes struck Islamic State targets in Libya today, just hours after the terror group released a grisly video showing terrorists carving off the heads of nearly 24 Egyptian Coptic Christians. The strikes ordered by the Egyptian President General al-Sisi were announced on state radio, marking the first time Cairo has publicly acknowledged taking military action in neighboring Libya. Egypt's UK ambassador called for international help.
We need to pull our force together and face this threat that is coming closer to home.
The 5-minute video is described as a watershed because it's believed to be the largest documented mass execution by ISIS outside of Iraq and Syria. Pope Francis left no doubt the Egyptians who were working in Libya to send money home to their families were singled out for their faith.
Solamente decían, Jesús, ayúdame.
Their only words were, Jesus, help me. They were assassinated simply for the fact that they were Christians.
While not as highly produced as recent propaganda, the video uses multiple effects, as well as camera angles and what appears to be a crane for overhead shots. This jihadi, who delivers the bulk of the message, speaks with a North American accent and wears the same camo worn by executioners who burned the Jordanian pilot to death in January. Analysts say this is significant and meant to show coordination between ISIS in Syria and North Africa.
All that is telling me that this is now the rise of an international, organized ISIS jihadist group.
Video references to Rome are not only about targeting Christianity, but meant to draw on Libyans who resent Italy's colonial past. And tonight, Italy's interior minister is reportedly calling on NATO to intervene. References to Osama bin Laden are designed to give ISIS the mantle of the global jihad.
Look, this is the beginning of a genocide perpetrated by the jihadists of ISIS.
On Fox and Friends, a Muslim community leader condemned the executions.
So it's a diabolical violation of Islamic morality. That's what ISIS is. They are Islamists.
Eastern Libya is already a safe haven for the anti-U.S. Islamist group Ansar al-Sharia. And Derna, the focus of today's airstrikes, is home to the training camps used by former Guantanamo detainee Sufyan bin Kumu to launch the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, which killed 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens.
These latest murders indicate ISIS is working with Ansar al-Sharia in Libya and has successfully set up an affiliate nearly 1,000 miles from its stronghold in Syria. Ed.
Catherine Herridge tonight in Washington, some really disturbing images. Copenhagen becomes the 3rd European capital so far this year to be touched by terror. 17 people were killed in Paris, of course, last month. A week later, Belgian troops fanned out along the streets of Brussels after the interruption of what was said to be an imminent strike. And now the first deadly terror attack in Denmark in 30 years. All the details now from senior foreign affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg.
When police shot the suspect in the Copenhagen attacks dead Sunday morning, they thought they got the sole man responsible for the terror spree. But now they are looking for accomplices. 2 men were charged today and are held in jail. Police are looking for others. They still won't name the 22-year-old shooter born in Denmark with a history of gang-related violence, although no known membership in a terror cell, but local media reports call him Omar al-Hussein and say he got out of jail just a few weeks ago. Danish intelligence have said he may have been inspired by the Paris attacks, which also targeted cartoonists and Jews.
We have now experienced the fear that terrorism seeks to spread. But we have as a community also responded with determination and resolve.
People mourned the dead today and held a march in the evening. The presumed target of the first attack on a freedom of speech event was Swedish cartoonist Lars Vilks, who had drawn the Prophet Muhammad. Instead, the gunman shot Danish filmmaker Finn Nørgaard, who made documentaries about the marginalized in society. Also killed Dan Uzan, who had volunteered as a security guard at the synagogue for more than 10 years. His family went there today to mourn. And in France today, Jewish graves were defaced. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling for European Jews to move to Israel. Copenhagen's chief rabbi resisted those calls.
We will continue living as Jews here in Denmark and everywhere else in the world. We will focus on living our life, go back to normal life, and showing the terror that they won't dictate our way of living.
Denmark's Prime Minister said that Denmark's Jews belong in Denmark and that the country wouldn't be the same without them. She also said that security around synagogues had been stepped up after the attacks in France. But Jewish communities are saying that in Denmark and across Europe, something more needs to be done. Ed?
Amy Kellogg tonight in London. Thank you, Amy. Now to the president's response to yet another grisly weekend. Correspondent Doug McKelway is at the White House tonight with fresh reaction.
After 3 days of golfing and fundraising in California over the holiday weekend, President Obama returns to Washington tonight to an impending snowstorm and a storm over ISIS. The latest horrific video adding urgency to the congressional vote on Mr. Obama's authorization for military force. But Congress is divided over it, and passage may be weeks away. House Speaker John Boehner telling Chris Wallace the AUMF is too restrictive.
The president is asking for less authority than he has today under previous authorizations. I don't think that's smart. We need a robust strategy to take on ISIL.
Others saying it's too open-ended.
I think it's very important that we find a way to get to yes on an authorization, but I also think it's very important that we not write another blank check.
The White House is trying to navigate the middle course.
The president has given them a roadmap to follow. They can take that or they can come up with something else, but they should not take a pass on this important issue.
The different interpretations may stem from mixed signals from the White House. The proposed AUMF expires after 3 years, but the administration's own recently retired director of the Defense Intelligence Agency said just last week that's not enough time.
This is going to have to take 10 years, maybe an entire generation or more.
Adding to what critics say is the administration's tentativeness, the White House statement following the beheadings. It called the victims, quote, Egyptian citizens, omitting any reference to their Christianity, something the Pope today noted was the sole reason for their murder. As evidence of the administration's resolve in the fight against ISIS, defenders cite continuing airstrikes, 2 in Syria over the last 48 hours, 13 in Iraq over the same period.
I think the president has the right pieces in place to try to confront ISIS. And obviously, we've made some important gains in trying to stop their effort to try to gain additional territory in Iraq.
Additionally, 4,000 troops from Fort Carson, Colorado, equipped with tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, are now headed to Kuwait.
Those troops will expand the military options the president has at his disposal, but at the same time, the president has limited how they can be used. His AUMF explicitly permits ground troops, but prohibits their use for, quote, enduring offensive ground combat operations. Ed?
Doug McKelway from a snowy White House. Good to see you, Doug. That ceasefire that took effect in Ukraine over the weekend is already being threatened. Intense artillery exchanges continue all around a town that is a key railway hub. Ukrainian troops and pro-Russian separatists are supposed to begin withdrawing heavy weapons from the front line tomorrow. We'll see if that happens. Up next, are Republicans about to take the heat for yet another government shutdown? But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Charleston, West Virginia. Derailment of a train carrying crude oil. Officials say the tanker car went into a river and is leaking right now. The water treatment plants in the area have been shut down to avoid oil getting into the water supply. Residents are being asked to conserve water. Surrounding towns have been evacuated. Just moments ago, the governor there declared a state of emergency in 2 counties. Meanwhile, Fox 4 in Dallas, as jurors in the trial of the man accused of killing American sniper Chris Kyle saw Eddie Ray Routh's confession today. The video was recorded the night of the killings, just a few hours after Routh fatally shot Kyle and another man. His attorneys say he was insane. And this is a live look at Austin, Texas from Fox 7. The big story there tonight, an amazing finish to the Austin Marathon. Yvonne Negatic led the women's race most of the way, but her body broke down at the finish. She had to crawl the final 2 blocks. She ended up in 3rd place. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back with a lot more news.